Welcome to New Directions for Women, a program of the Morris County, New Jersey chapter of the National Organization for Women. My name is Rebecca Lubetkin, and I and the entire production crew are members of this chapter of NOW. And we are all volunteers. We put this show together every month, and all of us, the people here in the studio, the floor manager, the camera people, the people in the control room, the producer, the director, audio, graphics, all of us are volunteers, and all of us have day jobs or are looking for one. We've been doing this for, I think, more than 16 years, probably very close to 17 years together. We have a very good show for you today. You know, there's an old expression, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. There's a natural corollary to that, which I'm going to make up so it doesn't sound as profound, but if you don't know where you've been, how can you be sure you're on the road to where you want to go? We're going to talk today about where we women have been. We're going to explore issues related to gender in the last decades of the 20th century. We'll look at topics related to school, marriage, parenting, career, as seen through the eyes and memories of someone who was not only there for it all, but was alert and aware of what was going on. When the rest of us might have been looking at these inequities as, well, that's life, she was working to do something about them, even as a small child. And we are so fortunate to have as our guest today Karen Spindel, whose knowledge and expertise and personal experience offer us extraordinary insights. Karen Spindel, whose uncle promised to eat his hat if she became an engineer, graduated from George Washington University in 1969 with a degree in mechanical engineering. We'll have to find out whether he really ate his hat. But Karen is a feminist activist, a longtime officer of her local chapter of NOW. She was honored to have been selected as the Pioneer Feminist of the Month in July 2009 by the Veteran Feminists of America. She's a proud mother of two feminist daughters, Samantha, 38, and Rachel, 21, and is currently writing her memoir, so we're getting on the ground floor of that memoir. She wants to share what it was like for her and her two daughters to grow up feminist in a sexist society. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted. And I'd like to start by asking you to think back to the beginnings, to your earliest feminist awareness, and share with us how and when you knew that things would not be the same for you as they would be for your male peers. Thinking way back to early childhood, if you can, is there a specific moment that stands out?
Well, I remember maybe as a child of 8 years old or so playing ball with my cousin Joey and my father. And my father would throw the balls to Joey. He'd always throw him a fly. And then when it was my turn
overhead,
he'd throw him a high pop, whatever. And when it was my turn to get the catch, it was always at a bounce. And I'd go, Dad, throw me flies. And, usually he wouldn't, but every now and then he would. And of course I would miss because nobody ever taught me how to catch a fly ball.
And because maybe you were supposed to miss because you were supposed to be catching bounced balls.
Yeah, I was supposed to be a girl doing girl things, and playing ball wasn't one of them. And, I guess in a way this was okay because as a result of this, I really never did pursue sports. And therefore, as I got older and I got into high school and I got into college, I really, at least in this one area, was not disappointed by what I couldn't have. Because in reality, there was no place for girls in sports. There really wasn't. And when my daughter Rachel chided me years later, Rachel's 21 now, about how come I didn't play sports in high school, because she played everything. I mean, she was a volleyball, skier, ice hockey, wrestling.
Well.
She even tried football, everything. And I said to her, Rachel, we didn't have it. We just didn't have it. And she didn't believe me, so I took out my high school yearbook. And I showed her the page, sports, the pages in sports, one page for girls, cheerleading. That was it. That was it. And I surprised myself because I took out my college yearbook too. And there I really thought I would see some women. But again, cheerleading, that was it.
And that wasn't just the engineering school. That was all of George Washington University.
Well, no, I'm talking about first my high school yearbook, which was Passaic High School, which is pretty big high school,
right.
and George Washington University, the yearbook for the
whole
university.
yearbook.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, if it was just the engineering school, it would be no surprise that there wouldn't be any girls because I was the only one anyway.
But what about in other kinds of informal play with boys or with girls?
Well, again, my cousin Joey comes into it. Boy, he probably doesn't realize what a star he's becoming at this moment. But also, he had an electric train set that my sister and I loved. That train set. We just adored it. And I didn't realize how much my sister liked it until recently. We talked about it. And she told me, yeah, she really liked it too. And my parents always said, oh, electric trains are too expensive, you know. And I guess I understood that until one year for my birthday, my mother gave me a doll carriage that, I don't know. I mean, I was a kid, I don't know. But thinking back, it must have been the most expensive doll carriage in the history of the world, you know. It would have been a great gift for somebody who played with dolls. But since I don't play with dolls, it really was, it ended up actually being a place when my sister was born that we would put her to nap because that's how big it was. And they ended up using it as a carriage for her.
Did you ever get a train set?
I never did. I never did. And it's interesting because years later, doing some research for the book, I found out really that Lionel actually in the 50s, right around the time that I was looking at and coveting my cousin's train set, actually came out with a pink and pastel train set for girls. How bizarre is that? I mean, my sister and I wouldn't have wanted a pink train set any more than my cousin would have wanted a blue train set. We wanted a train set that looked like real trains. I mean, that was the whole point of a train set. It was so realistic, and it just like was a miniature of the trains that actually back in those days ran through downtown Passaic.
The real ones were just miniatures of trains that you saw all the time.
My cousin's,
not the pink one.
No, not the pink one. And you know, I was thinking about it, and I thought, gee, if Lionel really wanted to reach out to girls and sell train sets to girls, maybe they should have included girls in the advertising. Maybe they should have let our parents see from the advertising that girls play with trains. Maybe they would have let us, other girls, see it. And maybe that way they might have had some
or on
girls,
the packaging.
but on the packaging, yeah. Not by making the trains pink. That just
no.
Yeah.
But you know, I was visiting a Lionel store very recently, and they're still selling pink trains.
Oh, you got to be kidding! I can't believe it.
So I don't know whether those are supposed to be vintage trains or whether they're still making them. Yeah. But I saw it there.
I wonder if it just is the vintage, because in what I was reading, they did say that it was a total failure. It was a total failure back then. Unless they're reviving it, a lot of things that were failures back then are coming back now, I'm afraid to say.
How about school? When you entered school, were there ways in which you realized that the expectations for boys were not the expectations for girls?
Well, in the games we played, in the clothes we wore, in
like
the doors we entered.
The doors you entered, what
because
is that?
I think above the very, very lowest grades, I believe, we had a girls' door and a boys' door. And the boys played ball and whatever they played, Johnny Rides a White Horse, whatever boys played. And at the girls' door, we basically played jump rope and maybe occasionally
the doors
hopscotch.
were on different sides of
the school. So you didn't necessarily go in the door that was nearer to your house. You went in the door that was the right gender.
But you played on in the play area that was near your door.
In front of
so
your
that
door.
means that the girls were playing with girls and the boys were.
Boys were playing with boys. And if you look at a lot of the old schools today, you'll actually see above the doors where it actually is engraved, where it says girls' door and boys' door in some of the older schools.
Interesting. So
I've
that
noticed.
was one of your earliest awarenesses.
Yeah, but there was one day that the boys came on the girls' playground, May 1st, Petticoat Day.
What's petticoat?
You don't know Petticoat Day?
No.
Oh boy, that was the day that the boys could come on the playground and pull up our skirts to look at our petticoats.
Who said that they could do that?
I mean, it wasn't exactly sanctioned, but kind of everybody knew about it and went along with it, and it was, pretty. Well, it's not that popular anymore, thankfully, now that girls wear pants to school.
Yeah, it's interesting because you wore skirts or dresses to school.
As we had to.
I remember there was a boy, I'll say his name too, Robert Burns, the same name as the poet, who used to sit in a tree near our school with a fishing rod so that he could hook onto our skirts and pull them up so that he could see our panties.
And not just on May 1st.
No. It was scary. I mean, you had to go past that tree on the way home. What else did you notice, though, in elementary school that was giving you a separate message?
Well, the boys had different kinds of jobs in school. The boys would be the window monitors and the blackboard monitors, and it was always like the boys were stroked by being referred to as big, strong boys, and the girls got to deliver the papers to the office or collect the papers or hand out the papers, and the adjectives most that described us were, like teacher's helper.
It's interesting that you say that the girls were the messengers to the office, because I remember a girl telling me that her teacher, she was in 3rd grade, she said, they were in a portable classroom, and she said, my teacher always picks a girl to go to the office except when it's raining.
Oh, because girls can't get wet.
Right.
Yeah.
They'll melt or something.
Yeah.
Did you go home for lunch?
We went home for lunch, and this was so bad on 2 levels. I mean, it was bad being a student, and it was bad being a mother. because when I think about how women back then had absolutely no life during the week, my mother was expected to be there when I got home for lunch with a hot lunch. When my sister and I came in every day, we had a hot lunch, or if not a hot lunch, something that she had prepared in advance. And basically, I guess that's the reason women didn't have cars back then and didn't have jobs. They were really tied to this lunch
Well, what was she
routine.
doing? What was your mom doing?
She was ironing, generally. When we would come home, my memory is the soaps on the TV and my mother standing at the ironing board. And it was interesting because part of the reason she was ironing was because of the clothes that we had to wear that oppressed us as students too, because we had to wear skirts, we wore petticoats, and of course this necessitated a certain behavior. We had to sit with our feet either flat on the ground or with crossed at the ankles so people couldn't look up our skirts. There was a whole
Did you wear shorts under your dress?
No, actually I didn't do that, but on the cold days, we had to wear leggings.
And leggings weren't like leggings today. That's
No,
2 different things.
Yeah, it's totally a different thing. And I think actually along those lines, if a lot of the women who shopped at what's it called, the clothing store, the underwear, Victoria's Secret, shopped at Victoria's Secret today, if they knew the origins and the misery of some of the original garments that are being reproduced now, they might not be that anxious to wear them. But leggings were something that we had to wear to keep our legs warm on cold days because we weren't allowed to wear pants.
So you took them off then when you got to school?
So you put them on at home, you took them off at school, put them on to go home for lunch, took them off, put them on coming back from lunch.
And didn't they have a bib, like a sort of like a farmer front?
They could have. Some of them, though, couldn't go over your skirt because your skirt had too many crinolines or something, so you couldn't really tuck your skirt in. So then you had maybe something that went under your skirt with an elastic or a zipper. I know. In the original draft of my book, this was just a short paragraph, and my sister read it. And she said, no, you have to do a chapter on leggings. She said, they were the misery of my life. She said, if you knew how many times I cried over my leggings because I missed the light belt, because I couldn't get them over my shoes, or I couldn't
And they're
get them
boots.
on.
You had boots too to get
If
them
you
over.
had that, maybe that could make it even worse.
Wow.
And I think in those days you had the boots that went over your shoes anyway, so you had to take off your boots too, your red rubber galoshes or whatever,
Right.
and your shoes were inside.
And high school, what were your observations in high school that, and I'm just trying to think whether it was the same, probably the same as what I experienced.
You mean clothing-wise?
Not necessarily clothing, but
in
in
high
terms
school
of the
with
school.
Oh, at school with the junior high, with the electives, with the cooking and sewing, and the girls took cooking and sewing and fine arts, and the boys took wood shop and metal shop and mechanical drawing, and boy, I mean, I certainly didn't need to take a course in cooking and sewing, the things that I feared the most having to do as an adult.
But you had to.
We had to take it. And I remember the boys would make these little like footstools or mailboxes, and they actually had something to bring
Or a
home.
lamp. Yeah.
And they could keep it, and it was really nice, you know. And in cooking, we made stuff that mostly tasted so horrible. I remember baked custard or roasted bananas, stuff like that, that ended up right in the garbage, And I remember the one thing I made in sewing happened to be a pink straight skirt. That was about the ugliest skirt you could ever imagine.
We had to make aprons.
Oh, aprons are always good for cooking. Then you could make it in sewing and use it in cooking.
Right. But you decided that you wanted to be an engineer at some point, and yet you were not allowed to take drafting or mechanical drawing.
Yeah.
So you had never taken those?
Well, at the time, I was much more, what I really wanted was the wood shop and the metal shop, because this was junior high back then, middle school now, but it was called junior high back then. And the one thing where we took fine arts and the boys took mechanical drawing, I would have preferred mechanical drawing, but that didn't mean as much to me at that time as the wood shop and metal shop. But then, when I got to high school and I knew I wanted to major in engineering, or I thought I did, I figured I really needed to learn some of what I missed.
You were missing out on something, yeah.
So then, in high school, as a course, I could sign up for drafting, which I did. I was definitely the only girl who took drafting that year. And I think it was safe to say I was probably the only girl who had taken drafting for many years prior and many years in the future, because there was no attempt made to interest girls in that. I mean, even my physics class, there were 2 other girls besides me. I mean, they didn't even...
Physics wasn't something that the girls tended to take.
No. I mean, if you wanted to take it, they let you. But there was no attempt made to steer you to that.
So interesting.
And I remember all the girls who were bad. You know, if you were good at math, okay, that was fine. But if you weren't, you didn't stand a chance, because you were just told that doesn't matter. Girls don't have to be good at math. Forget it. Don't worry about it.
Right.
Generations of girls were lost to math and science because of parents and who handed that generation to generation to generation.
But not only parents and not only schools, but peers themselves would put you down and wonder why it was that you needed to do. Did you just want to be with the boys?
Oh, you mean like, are you taking physics because you want to be with the boys?
Right.
Yeah, I guess that might have been in people's minds too.
Sure.
I know it was certainly when I went to GW, it was certainly in the admissions officer's mind when I went there, because when I applied to GW, I had this brainstorm that if I applied to the School of Engineering, that might cause me to not be accepted. So I applied as a Russian major. And I got accepted.
Figuring you would switch?
Figuring I would switch. And I mean, I had liked Russian, so it wasn't like I just pulled something out of the air. I had good grades in Russian, so I knew on that basis I would probably be accepted. I just was a little leery about the engineering. So during the summer when I had to go for my admissions interview, the admissions counselor just didn't want to hear it when I told him I wanted to switch to engineering. He said, women only major in engineering to find husbands.
Yeah.
Now, it's odd he could say that, because how many women majored in engineering? Had he ever found one before? I mean,
what did you have? And what were the numbers in your class?
I was the only one. So he really didn't have a
You were the
strong-
only one?
I was the only woman in my class at GW. There were some women in other grades who came and went. I think when I was a freshman, I think Judy was a junior, so she was floating around there for a couple of years. The year I was a sophomore, 3 freshmen came in. I think they either switched majors or transferred out.
So there weren't very
so
many.
basically,
Yeah.
going through, I was pretty much, I had one class with Judy, and that was the only woman I ever saw in a class.
You know, I would like you to tell us the story of Bethlehem Steel because it is so, so instructive in terms of giving us clues as to what life was like for an engineering major in those days. And we're not talking about so long ago. We're talking about the late 60s.
It was in 69, spring of 69.
So what happened at Bethlehem Steel?
Well, I was about 2 months away from graduating.
So you were a senior.
Yeah, so I was, feeling I had done really well in school, and I mean, I was more interested at that very moment in getting married than in getting a job, but that's another sexist story. But we're taking this class trip to Bethlehem Steel in Sparrows Point, Maryland. It was the student chapter of the Society of Mechanical Engineers that was sponsoring the trip. The trip was open to anyone from the engineering school. We could bring friends if we wanted, but I don't know whether anyone did. I surely didn't. We get to the parking lot of Bethlehem Steel. We pull into the parking lot, and we're with a student advisor and classmates on the bus, and the tour guide comes on the bus to give us our hard hats and escort us off. The man gets on the bus, takes one look at me, and he says, "You're not getting off the bus.
You're not getting off the bus.
You're not getting off the bus. You cannot take the tour."
Your college was willing to send you, but
My college was there.
Bethlehem Steel was
not going to let me off the bus. My professor, who was the advisor for this trip, didn't say a word. And, I was 21. This was like really, but so I said, "Why can't I get off the bus? Why can't I go on this tour?" So he said, "Well, the tour's kind of too dangerous." So a couple of my classmates came to my rescue. They said, "Well, if it's dangerous, we don't want to go either. So we're not going to get off the bus." I don't know if they really were afraid it was dangerous or they were trying to help me out. I'm not sure. But then he said, "Well, it's not really dangerous for you guys. I'm going to give you all hard hats. You'll be fine. You can all go." So I said, "Well, if it's not the danger, what's the real reason I can't get off the bus?" So he said to me, "Well, you're wearing a skirt." Of course, I had to wear a skirt because we weren't allowed to wear pants. No one had told me to wear pants, but I was wearing a skirt. And and he said, we're going to climb up catwalks, and so guys in the factory and the plant will be able to look up your skirt. Well, this sounded like it could have been a real, why he wouldn't have told me the real answer first, but this sounded like it might be real. And although I knew I would never be able to come back, I asked him, I said, "If I come back in pants, will I be able to take the tour?" And all this man would have had to do was say to me, "Yes, you come back in pants and you can take the tour." I never would have come back. I would have had no way to get there. I would have sat on the bus while everybody else toured, but I would have had peace in my heart.
Right.
But no, he said, "No, don't bother. Don't come back. That's not the real reason. You can't get off. You can't take the tour even in pants. Forget about it."
So you actually stayed on the bus while they took the tour?
So, yeah, but I wasn't going to let him off the hook that quick. So I said, "Give me the reason, give me the reason." And finally, he's had enough. So he says to me, "I want you to know the majority of the Bethlehem Steel stockholders are women. You should be happy to hear that." I said, "Well, not really, not any more happy than they would be to hear this." So then he'd had it. He handed out the hard hats, got everybody off the bus without a word.
And your advisor was nowhere?
He got off the bus too.
And was anything said about it when you got back?
He never said anything to me. I actually think I remember, though, that we were told that GW would no longer be welcome, that we were
really?
troublemakers and we should no longer we should not plan any more trips there. But years later, very recently, I met a young feminist, and a lot of the stuff has been in the back of my head for so many years. But because I'm working on this book, it's dredging up a lot. So I was talking to her about it, and I said to her, "Isn't this a bizarre story?" And my advisor just sat there, And I've tried to even actually contact him. I tried to find him
Oh, really?
because he had been on Classmates.com at one point, but he never responded, and I don't know, maybe he died. I mean, it was a long time ago. So, you know, she said to me, she said, you know, I think I have a theory. She said, you know, picture a father taking his young daughter to an amusement park, and they get to the amusement park, and he finds out she's too short for all the rides. He's not mad at the amusement park. He's mad at himself. He knows he made a mistake. He never should have brought her. And he feels responsible for her sadness and disappointment. But there's nothing he can do, and he's certainly
not going to deal with it.
And he's certainly not blaming the park. She said, that's how I bet your advisor felt. He was upset at himself for not knowing enough and not thinking to not take you along so that you
But he
wouldn't.
never said anything to you.
He never said anything, and I mean, nobody said to me, oh, wear pants. I mean, that had never come up, and that wouldn't have mattered anyway.
You know, that's a fascinating story, and I'm sure it's a lead-in to our talking about your first job, your job applications, and of course your marriage. Unfortunately, we've almost run out of time.
Wow.
And we can continue talking, but I do want to make sure that you'll come back and bring us. So what we're up to is 1969. We have a long time to go. Probably can't do it in even one more show. But I do want to get to your applications for jobs as an engineer, your marriage, and all of the other things that have to do with establishing yourself as an adult in the community. We have a good show for you today. It is called Growing Up Female, One Woman's Report on How Things Have Changed. And it is part 2. It's a continuation of issues related to gender in the last decades of the 20th century. We will be exploring them, and we'll continue to look at topics related to school, to marriage, parenting, and career, as seen through the eyes and memories of someone who was not only there for it all, but alert and aware of what was going on. When the rest of us might have been confronted by inequities, and we called it life, didn't think there was anything we could do about it, our guest today was alert, was aware, and was doing something. And so we, who have all benefited from her activism, will have a chance to hear what it was to go through all of that in the late 20th century. We are on YouTube, and this show in part 1, called Growing Up Female, you can see at YouTube. I hope we can get the website up on the screen. Oh, there it is. It is www.youtube.com. McNow, sounds like McDonald's, but it's Morris County Now, New Jersey. We are so fortunate that Karen Spindel has returned to continue telling her story. Karen Spindel, whose uncle promised to eat his hat if she became an engineer, graduated from George Washington University in 1969 with a degree in mechanical engineering. A feminist activist and longtime officer of her local chapter of Now, Karen was honored to have been selected as the Pioneer Feminist of the Month in July 2009 by the Veteran Feminists of America. She is a proud mother of 2 feminist daughters, Samantha, 39, and Rachel, 21, and is currently writing her memoir to share what it was like to grow up feminist in a sexist society, and to raise 2 daughters during those years in which attitudes, expectations, and policies have changed, and partly due to her own activism. So welcome again, Karen. I'm glad you could come back. We ended pretty much at your senior year of college. I know there will be gaps, but just to kind of review for us
bring us back to your senior year and what was going on, and then what was your plan going forward?
Okay, well, the two major events that occurred in my senior year, one of them I think I alluded to in the last show, was my trip to Bethlehem Steel, where my classmates were all allowed to take a tour of the facility there, and where I had to spend the day on the bus with an armed guard in the seat next to me because I was female and not allowed to be
Was
off
it
the
your
bus.
professor who was? You couldn't have been because your professor had brought you along,
No,
right?
my professor brought me. I think he probably had no idea and probably felt bad himself that he hadn't. I don't know, because we never talked about it. And I think he probably at some point just felt really terrible that he had allowed the situation to happen, that he hadn't foreseen it. I really don't know. I've actually tried to contact him during the years unsuccessfully.
What a loss and a humiliation.
It was terrible.
Yeah.
And then after everybody toured, they came back and they got on the bus and they asked me to have lunch with them. And I said, why? Do you need me to do the dishes? But I got off and I had lunch. And, you know, they had all these crazy reasons why I couldn't go off the bus. And one of them, the primary one, was that I was in a skirt, which of course I had to wear because that was the rule back then. But when I offered to come back in slacks, they told me not to bother,
No.
that wasn't the real reason. So that was that. And that was about a month before I graduated. But there was one high spot in my senior year as well, and that was that junior year, I had been nominated to Tau Beta Pi. I met all the
What is Tau Beta Pi?
That's an engineering honorary.
Beta Pi.
That Tau Beta, I think it was formed, I think originally Phi Beta Kappa had allowed engineers, and at some point they became more of a liberal arts organization. I think Tau Beta Pi might have been founded to fill that gap
So
for
it was
engineers.
like Phi Beta Kappa.
And I met all the requirements for initiation in my junior year except one. I wasn't male. So I got a woman's badge, and I got my picture in their magazine. The guys who were inducted didn't get their pictures in the magazine, but the few women that made it in had their pictures,
But
and we
you
got
weren't in,
we got a women. We were women's badge holders. We were called.
but you weren't really members.
We weren't really members. We couldn't go through the secret initiation or any of that.
So it's sort of like an auxiliary.
Yeah, kind of
Position.
like we don't know what to do with you, so we'll give you this, I guess.
So what was the good thing?
So
of
the
that?
good thing was senior year, my senior year, Tau Beta Pi reversed their decision. They decided to begin admitting women. And although I hadn't been the only women's badge holder from GW, I believe just because of the circumstance of when this initiation occurred and all that, I do think I was the first woman from George Washington inducted to Tau Beta Pi. But again, you know, being the first woman is not.
Except you could put it on your resume as something special. The problem is that you may have been excellent, but you were excellent when they wouldn't let you in. It wasn't that you had changed.
Yeah, no,
The policy changed.
the policy changed. The policy changed, yeah, and I think that as long as women put so much emphasis on being the first at anything, unless they're the first person rather than the first woman,
Right.
I think it's really something that we should de-emphasize.
Right.
I think we should, you know,
Because in those days, every other day was the first woman to
for something, yeah.
something, yeah.
Yeah, and all it meant was that you weren't allowed to before.
So then you graduated, and
Then I graduated, and none of this at that point mattered, because 4 days after graduation, I did what my college roommate also did 3 weeks after I did. We got married. And I left GW. I didn't get a phone number. I didn't exchange an address, nothing. It was like that part of my life was over, and I was off to be married.
so it wasn't that you didn't intend to use your education, or was it?
I think in my case, I really did want to be an engineer, but it just kind of sat on a back burner for a while.
So you got married 4 days.
And
Yeah.
I think I graduated actually on a Saturday and got married on the following Thursday, so that might have been 5 days, maybe 5 days.
So there were a lot of festivities during your senior year. Then I mean, a lot of plans that you were making.
I was I was totally disinterested in the wedding. I mean, just going and having to pick out a dress was an ordeal for me. I really left it all to my mother. I mean, all I worried about were little sexist things that I was afraid might happen.
What was
like,
the sexist
like
thing?
the wording on the invitations and things. When we went to look at invitations, I noticed that all the sample invitations said that, you know, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so request the honor of your presence at the marriage. Well, even the Mr. and Mrs. didn't bother me that much back then, but what really bothered me was the marriage of their daughter so-and-so to so-and-so, and it made marriage seem a little one way to me. So I wanted to change the to an and.
So instead of Jane Jones to John Smith, it would be Jane Jones and John Smith. And that was
a huge deal.
to your mother or
To my mother,
or to
that
the,
was a huge deal, because if that was what it was supposed to say, that's what would be in the sample books.
So did you get your way?
But I won that one. That was one small win for me. Our invitations did say and.
Mm-hmm.
So
And so you got married.
got married. Yeah. I had my picture in the paper, as brides did. And I remember saying to my mother, why does it have to be my picture? Why can't it be both of us? Why shouldn't Danny's picture be in the paper too? Why just me? And it was another one of those, that's the way it is, Karen. Why does it always have to be different for you? And in reality, I don't think that's the way it is anymore. Because I think when
You
you
were
see
way
the,
ahead of yourself.
I think when you see the pictures now, it is
well, at
usually
least
the bride and
in,
groom.
in the Times it is. I don't
yeah.
know about other
Yeah,
newspapers.
yeah.
So did you live happily ever after?
Not so
well,
much. Not
But-
so much. But for the time being,
time.
you know, I guess within the marriage that was one story, but there were just constantly external forces trying to make you feel second class.
Like what?
As a wife. I remember our first apartment calling up, at the time it was Ma Bell. I think she was nobody's ma, because a mother wouldn't have done this to one of her daughters, but
Ma Bell being the phone company.
Ma Bell being
was
the phone
company.
the nickname for the phone company. And I called to order phone service, and I remember it, how many years ago, but I remember it so clearly. Guy on the phone says to me, if you never had phone service before, you have to put a deposit. And
Because in those days they actually gave you the phones.
everybody rented. You rented your phone,
right.
and you had phone service. And I guess to put the equipment in the house, and I don't know what they were afraid of, but if you didn't have service, you had to establish your credit, I guess.
Right.
And so you had to give a deposit, I guess, in case you didn't pay a bill. So he said to me, has your husband ever had phone service? And I said, no, but I have. I lived in an apartment my last year in school and my junior year, and I had a phone. So he said,
You thought you shouldn't have to pay the deposit.
so we shouldn't have to pay. I was sure that was going to be the, I didn't think there'd be any question. He goes, oh, well, that doesn't matter. He says, because you were your father's responsibility then, and you're your husband's responsibility now. So what you had, nobody cares.
So you had
And
to pay the deposit.
I'll tell you, I was ready to not have a phone. I think if it had been up to me, we wouldn't have had a phone. I would have run down to the phone booth, but, I guess
You did.
calmer heads and all that. And so we ended up paying the deposit.
So now you have an apartment and a phone.
An apartment and a phone.
And
And a real bad feeling about myself, and questioning how somebody can actually do that to other people for a living, and just really feeling miserable. And everybody else saying, what's the big deal, what's the big deal? Because that's always what everybody else
Yeah,
said. What's the big deal?
Yeah, just go along.
Just go along. Who cares? Pay the deposit.
Right.
You'll get it back at
So,
the end.
were you immediately confronted with other issues like that?
Yeah, well, I couldn't even get a library card. I had just joined Passaic County now, somewhere in the mid-1970s, I guess. And one day I went, and now we had originally lived in Irvington, now we had moved to Passaic. And I went down to the Passaic Library to get a library card, and the application said, where it said name, it said, married women use husband's name. And they weren't only telling you about your last name, because back then almost every married woman did use her husband's name. They were talking about first name. They wanted me to put my husband's first name with Mrs. in front of it
Mrs.
on my
John
library.
Jones.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And And you didn't want to do that.
No, I didn't see why.
So did you?
Why I should, no. I said, I'm not doing this, you know. And they said, you know, well, that's just the way you do it. And I said, well, then I don't need a library card. I left. The next Now meeting, I walked in. I said, guys, I couldn't get a library card today. And that became an action. And we planned a date, and a bunch of us got together, and we walked into the library, and we demanded the right to have library cards in our own names. I mean, we were radical
So
people
your
back then.
own name would, instead of
Wow.
Mrs. John Jones, it would be Mary
Karen
Jones.
Yes.
Or Karen
Yes.
Jones. So it's not that you were giving up his last
No,
name.
no.
All you wanted was your own first
A
name.
first name. We wanted a first name. And we asked this library director, you know, why? And you know, he came up with this crazy thing about, well, what if you have the same name as your mother? It didn't make any sense.
Is your mother-in-law?
No, I don't know, was your mother or your mother-in-law, or women don't use junior. It was something that was so confusing and so nonsensical that it just didn't mean anything.
But you won that one.
And before we left, I guess we stayed until 5, and he wanted to go home for dinner, and we didn't care because, you know, we had a cause. And so he folded, and I got to have a library card in my own name.
I wish I had known you then, because I had a big button and it said, "Call me Ms., not Mrs. Him."
I think I just had call me Ms. Yeah.
What about, did you have issues with credit?
I remember having
Because you were
somebody-
working.
Yes, and I was earning more than my husband. And somebody called the house offering him, I think, a Bamberger's card, I think it was, which has since become Macy's. And I said, no, Danny's not home now, and he already has a card, but I would like a Bamberger's card. And they hung up on me. Yeah.
So,
And in 1974, when the Fair Credit Act passed, I couldn't wait to get an American Express card. And I saved it, or, you know, when you get American, it says card member since, and mine says card member, and I'm not even, I just saved the old card. I don't have American Express anymore, but I saved the old card. It says card member since 1974. And every now and then when I would talk to a student group, which I used to do occasionally, I would take out the card and I'd say, who knows why this card is so important to me? You know, I mean, nobody would obviously know, but I have that card.
that's interesting.
But then we went to get a house, to buy a house.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I mean, women, when it comes to buying a house, you feel at least as much like property as the house, because you're nobody. You're nobody. I mean, first of all, the purchase agreement said on it my husband's name, and then I think it said my name, his wife. And I said, nah, this isn't working for me.
But it did have your name on it.
I think it did have my name. It had his name and my name, his wife. Now, I don't know if that was because I had already insisted on having my name on it or not. That could have been. I could have said, be sure my name's on it. And so then they put his wife. But I have the, you know, the things.
Because I think it was because you insisted, because I think that on our first house, I was at Ux.
At Ux. Well,
his name at Ux, which would mean
his wife.
yeah, but it would mean anybody who happened to
Yeah.
be his wife. It wasn't me. It was anybody
Well, even if it
who
said
was married to him.
even if it said Mrs. John Jones, it's anybody who's
Anybody's
married to him.
him,
I
yeah.
mean, that's the
Exactly.
like with the library card. Anybody who's married to your husband can have a library card, just not you. But yeah, no. But that was, I'm talking now about the contract of
Right.
sale, and that had it said on it his name and my name, his wife, and I said no, his wife, and they changed it, and it was a big commotion, and they finally changed it to husband and wife, which I said okay, I'm okay with that, and then when we got the bill of sale, I guess because I had made such a huge commotion, the bill of sale did have his name and my name, husband and wife. And like you said, it's a good thing I did, because for the couple that we bought the house from, it was his name at Ux. So
funny.
they didn't even follow. I mean, I made the commotion, so I got my name.
didn't
My
change
commotion
anything.
wasn't enough for her to get her name.
No,
I mean,
it
she was just at Ux.
It didn't change anything. So all this time that you were going through all of this, you were also working.
Yes.
And this was your first job.
Yes.
How did that
Yes.
go?
Yeah, that was, well, even getting the job was weird. Even, you walk in. First of all, you look in the newspaper and you open to the one ads and you see, men wanted, women wanted.
Help wanted men.
Help wanted men, help wanted women.
Right.
And if you look under women, there's just not engineering jobs there. I mean, obviously. And if you look under men, you see engineering jobs, but they're really not interested in interviewing you. I mean, I was like, I guess optimistic and pessimistic at the same time. I guess I knew I wanted to work and I wanted to be an engineer. And I guess I was figuring somehow it would work out, but I decided I better go to an employment agency and let them figure it out. So I went to an agency. The first question, how many words do you type? And
They knew you were applying for an engineering job.
I'm not even, I think I had filled out the application, which probably said it, but I guess, even if you graduated as an engineer, I guess they still figured you wanted a job as a secretary. I don't know. That part, I've thought about that over again, but when I said I didn't type, he obviously became disturbed because he knew if I typed, he could find me a job. And when I said, but I can't type, and since I have a degree in engineering, I'd really like a job in engineering, he kind of thought about it and he said, you know what, maybe if we ask less money for you than I ask for the guys, maybe someone will hire you. Wow. And you know what? I fought with the library and I fought about the wedding invitations. I said, okay. I don't know why I said okay.
Well, because you wanted a job.
I wanted a job.
So did that work?
Well, on the third interview I went to, I did get hired. I don't know how many people he had to call to get me 3 interviews, but on the third one I was hired. But on one of the other ones, the person interviewing me did say to me, you must not think much of yourself because you're asking too little. Oh. So who knows? It might have helped me on the one I got, though. Maybe I was a cheaper pair of hands. Maybe that was the only reason they hired me. Who knows?
And the one who was chastising you because you had asked too little and it showed you didn't think much of yourself, he didn't offer you the job.
Didn't offer me a job, no. And that probably might have been the job I would have wanted. Now, I mean, did I get the job because I asked less money or because I was a member of Tau Beta Pi and graduated with a really high average and did really well in school? Which one? I don't know. Except that experience tells me that just about every job I have or haven't gotten did have something to do with gender, particularly in the affirmative action years.
And so how was it when you were on the job? You were working only with men? Or
the engineers were men. There were a lot of female support staff. After I'd been there a while, the receptionist who I became friends with told me that all of the people there had decided before I ever showed up that they weren't going to like me. And the fact that she was able to tell me that meant a lot to me because I did become close friends with a lot of these women. And we did have a lot in common. We did things out of the office. I became friends with some of the men as well. But the women, in some cases, I don't feel the men hated me as much walking in the door as the women did. So I considered it an achievement that we became friends. But one of the things I did that alienated them, I think, pretty much early on was when I saw the interoffice phone list. The women. When I saw the phone list, and the women were first name and last name, and the men all had titles. They all had the Mr. And I said, why do the men get a title and the women don't? And I think we all deserve titles. And when I was told that the list was fine the way it was by the female secretary who was in charge of the list, I said to her, I said, then you know what? I'd like to be listed as the other engineers, and I would like a title. And I don't think that really made me too popular, but I really don't. I don't think that's a way to win friends. But that was important to me, and they did change my name on the list. And and I hope maybe they thought about it and realized at some point that I was right and that we all
Or they
were.
might have thought you were being uppity.
Well, I mean, I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did.
You didn't want to be listed with them.
No, I'm sure they did. Like, why? Because that was the thing. It was always like, if this is good enough for us. I mean, that's been my whole life. That was my whole experience forever, starting in school and as a little kid, you know. If it's good enough for the other girls,
How come?
why isn't it good enough for you? And that's a hard question to answer.
But you got along well with the men that you were working with?
Yeah, and subsequently I got along well with the women too. I got along well with the men. I had a lot of close male friends there also, except there came a time when I was designing conveyors. That was what the job was. And I found an error in the program that they had contracted. And had I built the conveyor to the specifications the way it came out in that program, it could have been very serious. And so after a lot of soul searching, I decided I really did need to point it out to the more important people, even though I was sure they'd be as skeptical of finding an error in the program as I had been, especially since I was the one who found it. But they agreed that there was something wrong. I was never thanked. I never received any recognition. And when they convened a committee to work on the new program, I wasn't on it.
Really? You were the
And
one that
my coworker who had started right around the same time as me, who I was close friends with, who's actually lived right around here in Parsippany, he was on the committee.
And you were not.
And again, I didn't speak up. It seems to me I had trouble confronting men when my job was at stake. That seems to be the issue.
It makes sense. I mean, you needed the work.
Yeah. But I should have been on that team. And you know, instead of realizing it back then, I went home and I beat myself up. Why wasn't I smart enough? Why didn't they think I was good enough? And obviously it was sexist. I mean, it had to be sexist.
And all of this was before you had your first child.
I think while I was at that job, Samantha was born, so I'm not sure. It was right in that same neighborhood, 1971, 72, 73, that this was going on.
Yeah. And childcare was not a problem?
Childcare was always a problem, yes. Even when they finally came up with an after-school program in Clifton, it turned out that it was only for, you had to be poor to need childcare. If you had a good job, then you didn't deserve it. And so I could have had childcare for Samantha, but it would have necessitated me leaving a good-paying job and taking a poor-paying job.
But I do remember in those years that daycare, which is a little different from the after-school care, but there were no daycare programs for middle-income people. Daycare was strictly something for poor people.
Yeah. Even this after-school program was new to the city, and it turned out that I earned too much. So Rachel was a latchkey. Samantha, I'm sorry, my older daughter, was a latchkey kid for years.
Right, right. And your kids are doing real well now. I know
They're doing good.
Rachel is a senior at Smith, which is
where the archives are.
I know, that's a nice coincidence.
So, yes.
We are running out of time again, as we did last time.
I can't believe it.
And what year are we up to? Maybe 1975?
Something like that. Yeah.
We have about 35 more years to, is it 35 more years to cover in the continuing saga of Karen Spindel. So I hope that you'll come back again.
Oh, I'd
Keep
love to.
writing your memoir, and as you update your memoir, we'll get updated on what happened after 1975.
Yes,
and that would be really, really very, very special for us.
Yeah, we really haven't talked about my kids at all yet either, and their experiences with sexism
Yeah.
too.
And we have a special treat today. Our show is part 3 of Growing Up Female, one woman's report on how things have changed or not changed. And we've invited back Karen Spindel to continue reflecting and reporting on her memories of growing up in the 60s and her life after. Karen is back for an unprecedented 3rd time. She's the only guest we've ever invited back in more than 225 shows. And if we need a 4th time to continue the saga, I hope you'll
you'll agree to come back again because we'll be delighted. Let's see how far we can get today. Karen Spindel, whose uncle promised to eat his hat if she became an engineer. You'll have to tell us whether he did. But Karen graduated from George Washington University as a mechanical engineer in 1969. A feminist activist and longtime officer of her local chapter of NOW, Karen was honored to have been selected as one of the first Feminists of the Month in July 2009 by the Veteran Feminists of America. She is a proud mother of 2 feminist daughters, Samantha, 41, and Rachel, 24, and is currently writing her memoir to share what it was like to grow up feminist in a sexist society and to raise 2 daughters during the years in which attitudes, expectations, and policies changed, partly due to her own activism. So I want to welcome you, Karen.
Well, thanks.
And update our viewers. In part 1, you covered your childhood from your birth in 1947 through your last year in college. In part 2, we heard about your graduation in 1969 as a mechanical engineer, your wedding 4 days later, and then all the frustrations of getting your telephone service, your library card, your credit card, all in your own name, buying your first house, getting that first job, and the birth and care of your first daughter. The most pervasive response of others to your requests to be treated as a person in your own right was, and this is a quote from you,
Yeah.
Karen, if this is good enough for the other girls, why isn't it good enough for you? End quote.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
the stories are fascinating. I'm sure today's will be as well. And I urge all of our viewers who would like to hear the earlier stories to go to our YouTube site. It's up there again, and search for parts 1 and part 2 of Growing Up Female. So, Karen, we got the story up to about 1975. By then you were married, you had a job, and you were the primary earner in your family.
Well, yeah.
So you said.
Well, my husband and I were both working. My salary was higher than his, yeah.
Okay.
But at the time, I think we were still married. Yeah, we were still married.
About this
I think.
close at the time.
Yeah.
But one of the things you told us last time regarding work, and this is another quote from that show, you said just about every job you got or didn't get had to do with gender.
Gender, yeah, yeah.
And it seemed that even when you got the job, there were a lot of incidents that related to or limited you based on being a woman. So let's talk a little bit about your treatment on the job once you got it. Is there anything that stands out that immediately was a kind of click thing for you?
Well, there were clicks. There was clicking every minute. There was clicking. There was one big click. But actually, the job I'm going to talk about now was I was a project manager for mine conveyors for a company called Hewitt Robbins that was at the time a division of Litton Industries.
Mine?
Underground conveyors, coal mines, salt mines.
Oh, okay.
We did some. Actually, we quoted on the subway work for the DC subway before that was built, but we didn't get that job. That would have been something different. But conveyors that extracted ore or coal or whatever, salt from
Coal mines.
coal mines or salt mines, whatever. Yeah, and one of the things that I did.
Were you the only woman on that job?
This was a small company. The engineering staff was in general small. There might have there was a chief engineer, there was a urethane engineer, there was a conveyor engineer. There were maybe only 4 or 5 engineers in the place. There was a factory though, a lot of factory workers, and it was very traditional. The men did the men's jobs, the women did the women's jobs. It was
Except for
pretty
you.
much, except for me, which caused them to have to make some adjustments. And I actually remember that when I was hired, it was fortunate that there was a new president coming in, because one of the workers knew me from another job and had recommended me, and the original president of the company said absolutely not, he would not hire a woman. And the other new, younger president coming in was more amiable, and since I could do what they needed, he was willing to hire me. Wow. Because I had the experience and the knowledge, in spite of being female, yeah, he would hire me.
And maybe we're making less than the
You know, I will never know that. I don't know that. And I wonder about it sometimes. But I think everybody was paid pretty poorly there, so maybe not. Yeah. Actually, there was one time when they fired a bunch of the men because the men only did the purchasing and they had secretaries, and the women who did purchasing also did the typing. So they got rid of the men because the women could do both jobs for less money. So,
okay.
yeah. But that's neither here nor there. But I remember one of the memories was getting a phone call. The phone rings. I answered the phone, and it's somebody calling about one of the conveyors. They're having a problem with one of the conveyors out in the field. And I'm telling them in detail what they need to do. Oh, well, they start out, they go, is Mr. Spindel there? And I go, well, this is Karen Spindel, what can I do for you? And I'm having a problem with this and that conveyor. And I give them this long technical explanation of what they need to do to resolve the problem. And then after, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, the guy at the other end goes, how much longer am I going to have to wait for Mr. Spindel to come to the phone?
Who did he think he was talking to?
I don't know. He clearly wasn't listening to anything I had said. He was probably drinking coffee and playing solitaire or something, waiting for Mr. Spindel. Yeah.
You were just making time while he waited.
Yeah, blabbing on about motors and reducers, and I don't know what he was thinking. But so every day was a click. There was another time when there was a problem with one of the conveyors that we had out in the field, and my boss got a call. He was the chief engineer. He got a call. He said, we're having a problem with one of the conveyors. This was out in the Midwest someplace. And he was asked, he said, but please don't send Karen because the United Mine Workers contract is up, and we don't want them to go on strike. And if you send Karen, that'll give them an excuse to strike and go hunting. And, you know,
strike and go hunting.
They actually, I guess they liked to, they were hunters. There was hunting season. I don't know. And so, you know, I thought, wow, to have that kind of power, to be able to cause United Mine Workers to go on strike, you know, okay, first it would just be the one chapter, the one, you know, whatever they're called. But then the whole country could, you know, be on strike. How great, you know? What power, but they didn't send me. So
it wasn't part of their contract that a woman not come to troubleshoot.
No, but you know, a woman's in the mine. Oh, this is we're going out, we're walking. I guess they would find any excuse.
Would you jinx them?
Well, there was that mine superstition about women in the mines. But when I was in New Jersey doing this job, this was during the same years. I realized later that women were fighting out in the coal country to work in the mines. There was a movie or a book, North Country, about it.
So it was hitting home.
You know, there was this struggle to keep women out of the mines as miners, and I guess they wouldn't have really liked it as an engineer very much more. You know, that might have even been worse. Who knows?
Yeah, because it would show if a woman can troubleshoot the problems in the mine, it really puts a problem on their not even wanting women miners.
Yeah, and if they really believe or want people to believe that something horrible will happen if women enter the mines, and women keep entering and nothing happens, that's going to shoot that superstition to hell, right?
Right.
I mean,
that's right. So how about your relations with people on the job, your coworkers?
Okay. Well, I had one sort of subordinate who was the drafter. Well, back then it was a draftsman who was hired to work on the mine conveyor drawings with me, and he hated working for a woman. I mean, he must have needed this job really bad because he would just mutter under his breath, I don't have to listen to you because you're a woman. And he was just awful. He was a pretty good drafter, but
He
not a
would
nice.
mutter under his breath so you could hear him?
Oh, yeah. Otherwise, what would be the point if I
Yeah.
couldn't hear him?
Yeah.
Oh, he wanted me to know exactly what he thought about me. I don't have to listen to you. You're female.
He was
yeah.
singing it?
Yeah, little ditties. Yeah. I guess that's how he survived the trauma of sort of working for a woman. He didn't really work for me. I mean, he really worked for my boss, but I was kind of like in between. And when it came time for his raise, my boss called me in and he goes, "What should we do about Joe? What do you think?" And I said, "Well, he's a really meticulous drafter, because I don't want to let my personal feelings affect someone else's livelihood, although no one else seemed to care about that." But so I tried to be very objective. I said he's a good drafter, but he's slow. He really doesn't get the job done. But he deserves something. Just give him a little raise. So my boss goes, "Well, I'm not that happy with his work either. I'm not giving him anything. You tell him."
You tell him?
Yeah. He said, if you don't think he's doing a good job, neither do I. You tell him. So now I have to go and say to Joe, "Well,
This crazy man.
we did your review, and you're not getting a raise." And it was hard. It's a hard thing to tell somebody, even if you hate their guts.
Right.
But what does Joe do? He must think that I really had more power than I had, and that this was a decision that I made on my own, because he then goes to my boss, I find this out after, and says, "Hey, Ralph, I didn't get a raise." He probably said, "The bitch didn't give me a raise." I can hear him saying it. I mean, I not really hear him saying it, but in my head I can hear him saying it. And so what does Ralph do? Ralph gives him a little raise.
Really?
Yeah.
So Ralph socked it to you two ways.
Yeah, I mean, Ralph was great. I loved Ralph, but I don't think he did it really but that's the way it always was. I mean, part of Joe's willingness to go to Ralph over my head and all that was the kind of environment that was created there. I mean, one time they sold some spare drums, some scrap metal, something, got some extra money, so they went out and hired a couple of strippers and had a party for all the factory, the male foremen in the factory and the engineers. But this was the first time they had a woman in the engineering department. So they did this whole party without letting me know. I guess the word was, "Don't let Karen know, don't let Karen know." After the party, one of my friends, the same one who had recommended me for the job, told me.
Told you about it?
And I don't know if he probably did it because he wanted me to know, and also because he was one who liked to stir the pot. And I really appreciated it, because this was in the years before people knew what a glass ceiling was, and before that was even a term. He taught me about it. I saw that ceiling. And I think that being at a party with strippers and all your coworkers and knowing that I wasn't there probably was behind the courage that Joe had, or the belief that he could just go and just pass by me and go to my boss.
Did they have any little parties for the women who worked there?
Well, when I found out about this, I thought I was doing some special thing that was going to really get the women angry, and I called a meeting in the women's room, and I got all the women in, and I said, "Do you know what just happened behind our backs? There was just a big party with company money and strippers, and none of us were there, and it really doesn't help us when the guys get together and don't include." And they were like, "Well, we don't like strippers anyway. We don't care about strippers." And I said, "But you're missing the point. You're really not seeing the networking, and you're missing the point." And so one of the women, who was one of my closest friends there, she said, "Well, I'll see. Maybe that we can get a party for us." And I said, "But that's not really it." But the other women really liked that idea. So she walked out. She came back. She said, "I talked to Pat, who was the president, and he's going to get us tickets for a fashion show."
For a fashion show?
For a fashion show.
And they liked that?
And they were real happy with that.
Yeah.
And that was all they got to be happy, because there never really were any tickets. There really never was a fashion show.
They didn't do it.
Oh, unless they did, and just like the guys kept
left
it a
you
secret,
out.
maybe they just didn't want me to know. Maybe they did. But to this day, they
So
kept
you
a
got
better secret than the guys. 'Cause
possible
if
double-
they had
double
it,
whammy
if
there.
if they did have it, that was a secret they kept very well all these years.
Wow.
But I tend to doubt it. I think it was just, we'll shut her up, we'll tell them anything, and they'll go
And then
away.
they
and forget
just
about
didn't do it.
Because
Yeah.
that was the kind of place.
Now, all this time, you were raising a child
Yeah, yeah.
and trying to raise your child to be, hopefully, to have opportunities that maybe weren't yet available. How did that go?
That was one of the reasons I named my oldest daughter Samantha, so she could be Sam if she needed to. Even though I had hoped that things would change, I did have in the back of my mind that being
Well,
a
you
Sam
were
might come in handy.
You were aware so early. Did it ever work that way?
And it actually, some of her best friends in school were the boys in her class. And I remember one time she went to a birthday party and she told me how, she said, I went there, I knocked on the door, and the mother was like really surprised to see me there because she didn't know that her son, that her whatever her friend had invited any girls to the party. And he, oh yeah, Ma, that's Sam. And she said his mother was so surprised because I was just, he never thought to mention to his mother. Isn't that interesting, though? He never thought to mention to his mother that Sam was a girl. Sam was just one of his friends. In all his conversations, it was his friend Sam. He never thought to mention.
So he was enlightened.
So I think the kids aren't the ones who start out. It's the parents who create. Because if his mother had known, I bet she would have discouraged him
Well, especially
from inviting her.
having one girl.
But I mean, maybe he could have had more girls, except they weren't named Sam.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. But that was a problem even years later with Rachel, the boys and girl birthday parties. So that just remained. It's probably I think it's still a problem.
Were there more issues though with raising Samantha than with raising Rachel?
I remember when there were different kinds of issues. There are different kinds of issues.
There's 17 years between them, and it was at the point when things were changing every year.
But I don't know how much they were really changing. I think laws were changing. I don't think hearts were changing. Minds were changing. Attitudes were changing. I didn't see that. I mean, Samantha, when she was in nursery school, brought a doctor's kit to school one day. A little boy took it away, said to her, you have to give me the doctor's kit. You need a nurse's kit. You can't be a doctor. I said to Samantha, of course you can be a doctor. You can be anything you want. And what does a little kid in nursery school know compared to what your mother tells you?
Right.
Until one of my friends came over and said to Samantha, why do you have a doctor's kit? Todd, her son Todd, should have the doctor's kit.
Really?
Yeah, that didn't help that friendship.
Would something like that have happened with Rachel 17 years later, or do you think?
Probably. I think probably it did because they still had the boys' grab bags and the girls' grab bags. And when Rachel was in elementary school, I don't know if it was third grade or what, and they had to talk about what the kids wanted to be when they grew up, Rachel came home really upset one day. She goes, Ma, the boys want to be policemen and firemen. The girls want to be French maids.
French maids. What did they know about French maids?
Somebody must have had a French maid Halloween costume or something, or they
was
watched
cute
a TV
with the-
show with the little apron and the little short skirt. 3 kids, 3 girls wanted to be French maids.
Really? Well, maybe that's not any more of a fantasy than being a police officer or a firefighter when they're that
Well, except
age.
that's a career.
Those are careers, yeah, yeah. Wow. And that was Rachel.
And that was Rachel.
Later. Yeah.
And the grab bag baloney
what's the-
still,
what's the
the
grab
girls'
bag?
toys and boys' toys. And so even when Rachel got to school and they said that, and one of her teachers was actually enlightened enough to say for the grab bag, she sent a note home, bring in a gift appropriate for any child. And the gifts are all in a box, and the kids get to pick them. And there was one, Rachel's telling me, she goes, Ma, I saw this Nerf football, and I really wanted this gift.
It was the shape of a Nerf.
The shape, it wrapped, she said, and I kept hoping no one would pick it. And it was my turn, and I picked it. And it had a note on it for a boy.
Oh.
Because this parent felt the need to decide, even though that was not the instructions, to decide for all the kids in the class who should get that football.
So a lot of these things were the attitudes, not necessarily of the school, but of the parents and of the environment.
Well, in this case, it was the parent. And to the teacher's credit, she said, Rachel, this gift says for a boy, but would you like to keep it? And Rachel said, oh, yeah, and she
So
kept it.
Rachel was more interested in athletics than Samantha.
Samantha was a very good softball player, and she was the star player on her team, but she also liked dance and music and acting, singing. So she liked a lot of the traditionally female activities. Rachel didn't sing, didn't dance, didn't act. She was just all about sports. So it was harder for her. And even though when Samantha played softball, the girls played in shorts and had their games all after school at a time when the fathers couldn't ever come and working mothers couldn't come either. And when I sent a letter to the league, they said, we've been through this before and we have our reasons. And that was
So they didn't change it?
No, they said, we've had this conversation before. But that was different when Rachel came up. That part was different. But
So the policies had changed more than the attitudes?
I think the attitudes didn't change much at all. But even in the schools, though, when Rachel brought home a coloring sheet one day, and it had a nursery rhyme on it. Now, how do you feel about Peter, Peter, pumpkin eater, had a wife and couldn't keep her, put her in a pumpkin shell, and there he kept her very well? Is that like the message for your daughter or for your son? Is that a message for anybody? I mean, in school?
So did you complain?
Oh, yeah. I think they
did
just
the
thought
teacher
I was
think,
a little
yeah,
nuts, it's Karen again.
like, what are you
Karen
complaining
again,
about?
yeah.
This is a.
Everybody says Peter, Peter, pumpkin eater. I mean, he's
And they
been
don't even
around for a million years. Why are you worried
They
about
don't even
it?
think about what it means.
And the interesting thing was that Rachel put Peter in the pumpkin shell. They were coloring, and she put Peter in the pumpkin shell with her. I got a call from my friend Ellen, who was the mother of Rachel's best friend Alex, a male Alex, who said, I'm not coloring this. This is horrible. So the kids got it.
Yeah.
The teacher not so much.
Well, interesting. Were there other things outside of school that were really difficult for Rachel because of what was going on?
Constantly. We were writing. Well, she was very aware. See, with Samantha, I tried to just give Samantha a feminist upbringing and kind of tell her she could do everything. And her memories are of an upbringing where she never realized that she couldn't do whatever she wanted. Whereas when Rachel came along, I took an opposite tact, and I made sure she saw everything. I was at a different place.
You were an activist.
I was an activist both times, but I guess my approach was different. And you know why? Because I was established in my career. I had much more free time. I got more vacation. I had more time on my hands to do this stuff.
So you could be
I was married at the time, whereas most of when Samantha was growing up, I was single. So it was a more difficult to find the time for all of this when Samantha was little. But Rachel and I were writing to I remember going into McDonald's with Rachel, and when you went through drive-through and you ordered a kid's meal, they would say girl's toy or boy's toy, and I'd always say, what are the toys? And it was always a commotion. But one day we actually went in, and they see Rachel's a girl, so they don't ask the boy's toy, girl's toy question. They just hand Rachel a doll. And Rachel looks at me with this sad look, like, here we go again. And I said, Rachel doesn't want a doll. She wants the other toy. We didn't know what the boy's toy was, so she wants the other toy. And the person said, oh, you mean the boy's toy? And I thought I would do some consciousness raising, so I said, no, not a boy's toy. If Rachel wants it, it'll be a girl's toy. She wants the other toy. So they gave her a black doll.
So that was the other doll, the other girl's toy.
That was the other girl's toy.
Oh, the alternate.
Yes.
So how is Rachel now? We're winding down, and I just want to at least catch up, because I know she went to Smith College, a women's college.
Yeah. And
how is her we have about 1 minute left. How is her consciousness?
Her consciousness is so raised that my feminism really is a sorry excuse for the feminism that they're learning.
Does she complain about the fact that you were always up there complaining and embarrassing her?
Oh, no, I don't think so. No, not.
It's fine.
I just wasn't a feminist enough, and I wasn't worried
interesting.
about poor women enough, and women of color enough, and lesbians enough. I was
you were
just worried about myself. That's her perception.
Well, I would love to have both of your daughters on. I'd like to hear not only how they feel about the way they grew up, but how they feel about you and your activism, and also how they feel about life today. We're pretty much finished with this show. I may have to ask you back again.
It just flies by.
Where are we? What year? We're probably at maybe Rachel's high school graduation.
I think we're about 95 or something.
1995. Well, we still have 20 years to go, and now that you're not working, you're retired, and you're doing interesting things. I'd love to hear the rest of the story up until this time. So. You think you might be able to make it again?
Oh, sure.
I hope so, because it keeps going fast, and at least now we won't have work issues to talk about.
Yeah. And I would love my kids to.
Wouldn't that be great? If both, or even